do you see a way forward where the traditional mainstream media can rebuild that trust that a lot of it has lost? Because I still think there's good work that some journalists do and some publications do. It's just there's also a lot that I think is fair to criticize.
Well, I think actually that the legacy media, I think it's correct to refer them as legacy media, is really an inefficient way of humanity learning what is going on. It's an old technology that was necessary before you had the internet, but it is, I think, fundamentally inefficient and inferior to simply everyone voicing their opinion and the most interesting opinions being surfaced. If you say like just model how does the media work? There's a small number of prominent publications that write a small number of articles. They write articles about areas that they don't actually understand and where they're often not there. They were usually not there as a field they don't understand. So even in a best case scenario, you've got someone who, this is assuming that the journalist is doing their absolute best to write an accurate article about something. They're still not an expert in the field, and they're still, in vast majority of cases, weren't actually there. So the best case of that article is really going to be pretty bad. That's why, if you really want to say like how accurate is any given article, well, when you see an article that you actually understand the field, or you know what actually happened, how accurate is that article? It's usually, you read it and say, that's actually not at all what happened. That's usually how it goes. Well, that's true for all the articles. It's not just true for the things that you're an expert in. It's true for all the articles. If instead we have a vastly larger number of people who are expert in their field, who were there or literally are there right now, you've got, 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 times more sources of information. The sources of information are better to be more accurate because they're experts in the field or are literally there. And it's really not something that legacy media can compete with. You think like legacy media is like the fax machine, or like writing letters, like with a pen and paper, compared to the internet. Like how many people used to communicate by writing letters because that was the only technology available at the time. So they write letters, and back in the day it was with a quill, quite difficult to write a letter with a quill, and then you'd have a very slow, often your mail would get lost. But this is literally how the world communicated. It was like writing a letter that would have to be then carried by someone on a horse from one person to another. In the old days, when they would declare war, half the country wouldn't even know that war had been declared because they didn't get the mail. So, and even in the U.S. Civil War, there were battles that took place well after there was a peace deal signed because they actually didn't know that a peace deal had been signed. In fact, one of the last battles of the Civil War, I think maybe the last, was right near our Starbase launch site in South Texas. And they fought a battle because they didn't realize that the sides had actually declared peace. So that's kind of what you have with some version of that with the legacy media.
I would challenge one thing, though. Speed is not always, I think, king. I mean, obviously you want breaking news to happen quickly, and it's important when it does. But and I think AI is going to help to some extent, but the reporting on the ground is really important. But when you go at a really high speed, you also have more chances of getting something wrong, right? So when you have things travel really quickly and you've got the wrong information, I mean, sometimes that information can even lead to potential death or people making very bad decisions because they're relying on information that wasn't vetted. And even with journalists, right? Like you see that happening. It might see a source for a story and then they'll copy it, and there's broken telephone going around, and because it's traveling too fast and people are trying to get it out too fast and they haven't properly verified the information. So I think it's important to sort of keep that in mind, especially when it comes to important stories, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, the media is the legacy media has a shrinking pie problem where the revenue is decreasing, views are decreasing. So they're actually desperate to get news out first. If you get news out even a few hours later, you're going to get much less attention. So this has actually led to a radical reduction in the quality of information made by legacy media. But for legacy media, the ability to actually correct things is basically zero. They can technically run a retraction, a week later that nobody reads. Whereas the fast news online, or like on the X platform, is corrected immediately. So yes, there may be, and often are, wrong things that are said, but then they are just as quickly corrected. And the same cannot be said of legacy media that's printed.
In some cases, it's corrected. Like if the community note, for example, goes through. And by the way, I mean, this is not just an X situation, right? There's other social media platforms that don't have things like community notes. So I find that things do spread very quickly, and there isn't always a mechanism for corrections. And I think, look, community notes it may be imperfect, but I think there's a lot that it can do and a lot of areas where it can grow to do better on the correcting of information. So I think, and I agree with you that with, one thing that I have a significant issue with is that a lot of times when a media outlet makes a mistake, even if they do correct it, no one sees that correction and there's no sort of accountability. Like I'd like them to publish and say, we've made this many errors today and, this month, and be really accountable about it to the readers, because I think it would also benefit them because it will build trust. Do you see a world where, you take, like, one thing that I've really enjoyed on X and other social, well, X, because that's really the dominant platform for me, but when there is breaking news of some sort, you can get like really interesting people breaking it down. So you might have somebody who has expertise in a particular area or maybe lives in a particular region. And it gives me this kind of enhanced idea of what's going on in the news. So to me, I see it as something that the citizen journalism aspect of it or the community aspect of it is something that to me seems like a great potential enhancement to traditional media. And perhaps there is a way for it to work better together. Do you see that, or do you see social media completely replacing sort of the conventional media format?
Well, in a bit of what I think, what has actually happened and will happen increasingly over time is it's sort of like trying to argue that people should go from having email back to writing letters and mailing physical letters. It's simply not going to happen. So it's not even whether I want this or not. I'm simply describing that legacy media is a legacy. It's an inefficient and very slow means of disseminating information. And civilization is kind of a group mind for humanity. The efficiency of each person is kind of like a neuron in a giant brain, and the effectiveness of that brain is going to be function of how well those neurons fire, how quickly they fire, how quickly information goes around and is corrected. And I think legacy media can no more compete with internet media than written letters can compete with email. That's simply just a fact. It doesn't mean that nobody writes letters anymore. There are some letters written, but they are niche, and legacy media is niche, and will become even more niche. That's just a statement of fact. It's whether I want it to be true or not.
I understand what you're saying. I feel as though there's certain things that media institutions do better than, for example, if somebody's just on social media, and some people are spectacular, right? Some people produce incredible content. They take hundreds of hours to do it. So there's always exceptions. But if you wanted to report on a story, like I know as a journalist, it takes me a very long time. Basically, in proportion to how much I'm paid for a story, it sort of gives me an ability to spend more time researching it, speaking to more sources, really going to the places. So there's certain kinds of journalism where it's like, say, investigative pieces that I think you have a higher chance of getting a really good story that, a publication might invest in, just kind of like a movie studio invests in Oscar kind of bait movies, even though it's not a money leader for them, right? Because they want that sort of reputational, they want to have that reputation for good movies, same as they want reputation for good journalism. And I don't know how that would translate to social media for where people don't necessarily have those kinds of resources, including just time.
Well, if somebody is actually an expert in a field, or literally was there, it takes very little effort for them to actually describe the situation. It's much harder for someone who wasn't there or is not an expert in the field to attempt to become at least a slight expert in the field, or interview a whole bunch of people who were there. That what I'm saying is that is no longer necessary. You can now hear directly from world-class experts, as on X, you can hear directly from the best AI scientists and engineers in the world, directly from them, immediately.
But that information, and in some ways it's good, that information isn't filtered, it's uncensored. And at the same time, when you have a good journalist, that person should be good at discerning, who's a really interesting expert, and let's bring different diverse points of views into the story. So it's more than just, one person's opinion or a few random people's opinions who might have expertise, but, haven't done like a full sampling.
Well, like I said, I think the debate is somewhat moot, because what I'm describing is simply what is happening and whether one likes it or not. So, like I said, legacy media is like the written letter, like mailing letters written with a quill or pen or something, versus email. It's not that there are no more letters, but email is vastly more efficient, faster, and that's just legacy media is just an old technology. I think it's kind of absurd that we print out newspapers still after all this time. And my son Saxon, he was having some profound observations in the world, was sort of walking through the airport and saw, it was a Wall Street Journal or something, that had that day's date printed on it. And he was like, wow, how did they know it was today? I was like, no, Saxon, they print that out every day. That they make that newspaper every day. He's like, what? So you can sort of see the absurdity of from a child. Like, they print this out every day. That it's just, and then he said, well, they probably just read the internet and print it out. And I said, yes, that is indeed what most newspapers do. The vast majority of news is they read something on the internet, write an article, and print it out. So that's just the vast majority of news, so-called news. And very often it is, in fact, some ex post that they're writing an article about.